All right, hi everyone. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for being, there's so many people tonight. It's pretty impressive. So when we think about the purpose of philosophy, definitely what we think of is that we should be able, as philosophers, if I qualify as such, to think about anything, that there shouldn't be a limit between, on the one hand, topics that are typically, for philosophers, and topics that shouldn't be, regarded as philosophically relevant or worth speaking about. So, especially on something like sexual desire, which is not only omnipresent, in regards to the sexual allusions that we see around us perpetually, such as, I don't know, on the internet, or just like being in the street, or just speaking with friends or whatever, but also because of the omnipresence of sexual thoughts within us, and not only because of the omnipresence of sexual allusions around us, we should definitely consider that this essential dimension of human intimacy and human existence in general should be definitely approached by philosophy. As Diderot used to say, and I like this quote a lot, he says, "There is always a bit of testicle at the bottom of our most sublime feelings." So indeed, like, in everything, somehow this is such a fundamental feature of us, this obsession in a way with sexual desire, that philosophers have to think about it. And last time, indeed, what I tried to do, and I'm going to try to do something different today for the people who are here again. Last time what we tried to do is to explore a little bit the reasons why philosophers actually tend to neglect or despise even such a subject, sexual desire. Then we actually focused on recycling certain philosophical thoughts about desire in general, and we tried to apply them to sexual desire by trying to explain how really desire works in terms of mimetism, for instance, the fact that maybe I don't desire something, but I desire this thing just because somebody else desires it. So we spoke about that a lot, and you had a lot of thoughts about that, and that was great. And we ended up by speaking about, by considering the actual eroticism that is engaged within the taboos that sexuality is carrying. So I spoke in a way about, how can I say that? I spoke about how conventions and maybe forbidden things or activities, practice that might be judged immoral sexually can actually trigger our sexual desire. So I spoke about that a lot, and that led me to be interviewed by a great journalist, nonetheless. I remember I was on my way I was in the airport on my way back to New York from France, so I was not very fresh, I have to say. And she asked me a bunch of questions, and then she's like, "Okay, great, the article is going to be ready within a week." I look online, and here is what I see. "A philosopher of sex says sexual freedom is destroying desire." I'm like, okay, great. So, no, it's not what I said, and this made me, I think this actually makes it worth it for me to just, come back on that topic and speak again about it, maybe to clarify some of the things I'd said, but also to explore other aspects of this very important subject. So, basically the questions I'm going to be focusing on again here is, what is the object of sexual desire, that obscure object of desire, as a movie from Louis Buñuel from '77 states. I don't know if you saw that movie, it's a great movie, that obscure object of desire. And what do we sexually desire and why? Okay, so keep that in mind. And to begin, I would like, a little bit like last time, I would like to consider the person next to you, the 1, 2, 3 people next to you, and just chat for a little bit about the differences you might be able to make between a need on the one side and a desire on the other. Think about that for a minute, please. Okay, guys. So here, actually, that was useful to speak to you. Here, I'm not focusing specifically on sexual desire, but just like in general. What is a need and what is a desire? What's the difference? Not obligatory the difference that you would make between the two. You don't need to go deep here yet, okay? But like, what would people, point out as differences between a need and a desire? Go ahead. Anyone?
You need oxygen, but you want wine.
Fair enough. So that would mean what? That would mean that maybe needs are necessary, whereas desires might be superfluous. That's a very classical difference that philosophers have been pointing out when they speak about needs and desires indeed. What else?
Both are biological imperatives, but without what you need, there are consequences.
You mean physical consequences? So needs would be about survival, about physical, survival basically, and natural also, naturally related. By physical, I mean like our natural survival. And on the other hand, desires would be more artificial, you think?
No, I think that you can still desire something physically, but perhaps if you don't get it, there's not going to be like negative results.
Okay. Not in a physical way. You're not going to suffer from it, actually. I don't know who raised their hand first.
I think there's also a temporal quality of it, like desires are very transient or persisting and can be more variable, but needs are everlasting. Like the needs that we have, you need and you have to continue to search after for the entirety of your life, versus a desire can come and go, or it can be really strong at one moment, and there's more flux there.
Yeah. Behind you?
Hey, I think that needs are more like rational and like conscious thing, and desire is more irrational and subconscious, because you basically don't know why you desire something and you know why you need something.
Okay, so about the reasons why you would need something, you would be clearer than about the reasons why you desire something. Indeed, this obscure object of desire, it's obscure indeed. Yes, you're right. So that's one thing. So we've been basically, three main differences that, people think about is like, on the one hand, needs are natural, they're necessary, they're also limited, whereas desires, and that's by limited I mean a little bit what you were saying, desires are more illimited in a way. As you say, they have like, their frontiers are more like blurry, and superfluous and artificial. That would be something to qualify them. Well, these distinctions can be put into question, and namely, between the natural and the artificial, for instance, it's very hard for humans, and especially for sexual desires within humanity, to make really the difference between the naturality and the artificiality, what is nurture and what is culture, and what is nature. So that's something that we could also put into question. Necessary and superfluous also is a distinction that raises question, especially in the consumerist society where everybody's always telling you that, it's all about getting more, etc. So the distinction between superfluous and necessary is not actually as clear as we think it could be. And a great philosopher I think about when I try to really differentiate between what's a need, something I have nothing, again, something that I need to fulfill, because if not, I'm gonna die, basically, and what is a desire, is Epicurus, who is very famous to have done this differentiation between three types of desires. On the one hand, he says, well, you have the needs, he called them the natural and necessary desires, okay? So purely, literally, oxygen, water, as you said, food, shelter, to not die of anything in particular, okay? So that would be the natural and necessary desires, or the needs, okay? And then on the other spectrum, I'm going to begin with that, and then I'm going to say what's in the middle. On the other side, you have like the unnatural and unnecessary desires, and that would be, for instance, the desire for glory, or ambition, or the willing to have money for the sake of money, or things like this, or living in excess of some sort, which is why, by the way, Epicurus has been for a long time misunderstood, because everybody thinks that, that's why, people name their restaurant Epicure or something like this. This is a big mistake. If you name your restaurant Epicure, you're going to serve water and bread. This guy learns how to be happy because he knows how to control his desires precisely. So huge misunderstanding about Epicurus here. Just saying. And in the middle, you got this third category that is like natural desires but unnecessary. That's where Epicurus would put things such as, let's say, I need to eat, okay, but I can eat a piece of cake instead of eating a piece of bread, right? So it's still natural, but it's unnecessary. And sexual desire would be within this category for him, quite interestingly. Because on the species perspective, while sexual desire is kind of, useful to reproduce, right? So that would be actually a natural and necessary desire. But here he's speaking just on an individual perspective, not on the species perspective. And he said, well, we don't need to have sex, but hey, it's nice. That's exactly what he says. It's nice. But now, it's funny because when he speaks about sexual love, he has a whole other opinion. And that, he says, is very dangerous. Why? Because when we actually desire something while loving it, we tend to construct a whole image of this thing that might be delusional. That might be something that's not corresponding to the object in question. And he's one of the first philosophers to warn us against this imaginative power that we have to just desire something that actually doesn't exist. So, when I think about the difference between need and sexual desire, I think the very key here is in a need, you know exactly the object, or you grab the object, you satisfy your need, that's it. Within desire, there is this whole mental image or mental construction at play that's going to make you think about the object a certain way. That might be very different from the actual, body or person you have in front of you. So, the objects of our needs, in a way, are in the external world and we can actually grab them, but not really the object of our desire, is what I'm trying to say here. So desire, for a large part, is just a product of a mental elaboration, an intimate mental construction, as I was saying. It doesn't make it not a need. In a certain way, it's more, I would say, like a dialogue or a bridge between a need, a physical need in a way, and a desire, in the sense that it's always this sort of inner conversation within, like, the most primitive part of our brain, literally the animalistic part of our brain, and the more conscious attempts to represent this object to ourselves and to build this image of what we desire, which is what I call the phantasm. So that specific body or that specific person that I have in front of me might just very well be just the random vehicle of my sexual desire. Maybe it doesn't make sense to say I desire this person. I desire what this person represents. That makes sense. But to say I desire this person doesn't make any sense in that perspective. The real object of desire is first and foremost the phantasm. The idea I have of this person. So we desire what? We desire, specific features. Physical, but also behavioral, actions, attitudes. We expect somebody courageous, we expect somebody, nice, we expect somebody with, certain physical features. I'm not going to make a list here. It's, what I'm trying to say is just that all these features are just happen to be embodied by this person, and we project all these features onto this person. But what the object of love here are these cognitive features that we have in our mind, not in the person per se. So this phenomenon has been very well described in literature. And I think here about French literature in general, you might maybe know about Stendhal, who speaks about this processes of falling in love. He calls it the crystallization. I don't know if anybody... And it's beautifully said. He takes the example of this, this branch of a tree, that just a branch of a tree. It's not very pretty, it's like a dead tree, whatever, a branch. And this branch, happens to be thrown away in a salt mine, okay? And it stays there for months, or I don't know exactly how long. And when you take it back, it just has all these little crystals, these beautiful crystals of salt on it, and it's beautiful, right? And what's happening here is that those crystals are created by the person expecting to get back this branch. But it was not on the branch to begin with. So this metaphor is here to explain precisely what's at play when we actually try to, how can I say that? to when we actually try to say that we desire a certain thing, we forget, and especially in love, that's here, it's a specific part of the topic, especially in sexual love, we definitely need to be more aware about what we project onto the person. But you know that already, I'm sure, pretty well. So Stendhal spoke about that the lover creates the object of his own desire. Rousseau also speaks about that, and he has a beautiful text that I would like to read to you, but we'll do that at the end if I have time. So basically what I wanted to say here in this first part, before I get to my next question for you guys, is that the desire doesn't aim at a specific real external object, but more at a sort of inner hallucination, in a way. And that's what Stendhal is trying to tell us as well. And we are not only creating what we love in the person, in this like representational and mental construction, this like love phantasm I was speaking about, but we also just create for our sexual pleasure scenarios or situations or stories, regardless of the partner, you know, of the feeling that you might have with the sexual partner you have at that moment. So that's also another meaning of the phantasm, maybe the meaning you had in mind at first, you know? What happened, like this kind of brain caress, I would call it, or I don't know, that you might have. I know that, you know, in America we're not supposed to speak about that, but it's very interesting to just, you know, be able to discuss about what's really happening in a lot of, you know, in a lot of psyche right before the orgasm, very often a lot of people, and that's not related to the attraction you might or might not really have at that moment, just like to kind of get motivated, you have this phantasm, okay, it goes, you know, but it's not, you don't always, it's not obligatory, you might be very well attracted to the person, but still you give yourself this little push, or you like create this whole phantasmagory, which might be beautiful also, and sometimes a little, you know, you might not communicate it with you know, your partner or even like with your most intimate friends, but still it's somewhere inside of you, and that helps you tremendously to trigger this sexual desire. So again, you see how the process is cognitive and imaginative before being purely physiological. Okay? So on that aspect, let's turn to my second question. If I ask you, I'm going to give you a good 5 minutes for this one. Get ready, okay? To what extent do you think that you can choose what your sexual desires are? So here I'm speaking about desires, plural, okay? To what extent you think you can choose these phantasms you have in your head? This idea that might trigger your sexual desire. To what extent you think you can choose them? To what extent you think you have a control over them? Go ahead, speak with your neighbor about that for a minute. All right, guys. Any remark on that? Yes? All right. Let's listen.
So we basically said that you can't control them exactly directly, but they can be influenced indirectly. That if we think of objects of sexual desire as emerging from the things we need and who we are, that evolves over the course of our life, and therefore the shape of the phantasm can change over the course of our life as well. And so we don't necessarily we're not static in what we're necessarily sexually attracted to. So like, if you're attracted to a certain kind of person in your early 20s and that results in 10 years of horrible relationships, maybe you learn, you evolve as a person, you kind of learn those lessons, and you start to look for the things that you were looking for in other places. And I don't think that's not just superficial, it's not just censoring, but it can actually be a fundamental evolution of that need.
So the fact that it can change is a proof of certain freedom in a way. That's what you're trying to say. Yeah, absolutely. Then what are exactly, you know, the conditions of that change? I'm not sure you have the whole control over them, but still, yes, absolutely. What else? Anybody? Yes?
I kind of think that desire in general is basically something that we lack. We desire what we lack. So in that case, even though we do have a sort of freedom in choosing what we desire or our desires, we're also kind of constrained by the fact that we're always desiring something that we have.
So our desires would be basically determined by what we're missing. Okay, yes, so that would be then to say that there is no freedom in a way, or yeah, we're conditioned to desire a certain thing because we don't have it. Yeah, absolutely. What else?
I think desire is a lot, as Plato would say, and it's something that I desire something that I cannot have, right? And that's why I desire it in the first place, because I cannot really have it. I think to what extent you can actually control that, you cannot. I think it operates on an unconscious level, and you just kind of, your past is something that's embedded in the unconscious, and you cannot really control it. It just kind of control you back.
So here you're on a metaphysical and psychoanalytical level, guys. I was gonna more aim at like the sociological and historical level. Anybody would have something to say about that? Yes.
I think that, I guess historically, we put in these institutions or either self-practice or group practice of almost like it could be construed as like brainwashing, like when religion is put in to say like these should be your sexual desires, then a whole generation or centuries of generations of people, then that's their impulse because that's what they were taught, that's what was passed down through like DNA and all of that. But and then well, I mean, they say that some traumas are passed down. So, but I think that individually right now what's really popular is like the curating of your own psychological and physiological health. And it depends on how deep you are and like how interested you are in changing your impulse. Or if you have that original impulse, if over a period of time of practicing something else or seeing other behaviors that you find you want to be your impulse, like when does the desire turn into the original impulse? And when can maybe impulses evolve or change over a certain amount of time of practicing?
So then here, actually, it's funny you mentioned that because my question here would be like upstream to that. Why do you want what you want then? You know what I'm saying? What makes you want to have this type of sexual practice, let's say, over that type of sexual practice, for instance? You know, that's what I mean. And maybe this willing this sexual practice or like changing your, your impulse or whatever towards that direction is not something that you really purely choose, okay? So that's what I'm gonna try to just put into light here a little bit by insisting on the fact that society, of course, shapes and defines the vast majority of what we desire. So we spoke a little bit about that last time, about mimetism, but I just want to expand a little bit on a historical perspective. So sexual desires, before they are a physical or physiological reality, are a mental or cognitive reality, but also a historical and sociological reality. They have a history. They are social phenomena just as much, if not more, as they are natural, physical, or individual phenomena. So bodies, in that sense, are never naked, so to say. They always wear these symbolic or interpretative layers that society's norms are imposing onto us. And we actually, that's how we live in society, we have to internalize several normative judgments that define what we consider desirable, which persons, which types of bodies, which type of clothes, which type of behaviors, which type of attitudes, but also which sexual activities in general. But also these normative judgments, that society imposes on us, define the taxonomy or the classification of sexual desires types. Let's put that this way. And what I want to say here, I want to take two examples, for instance. One is about ancient Greece, and the other will be about the status of the Berdache in the Navarros, so the Native Americans here. So let's take the example of an Athenian, in ancient Greece. An Athenian in ancient Greece, let's imagine like a person, let's say, in his 20s, a citizen of Athens, whatever. What matters to him is not so much, because we say a lot like, oh, homosexuality was allowed, in ancient Greece. the very use of the word homosexuality doesn't make sense at that time because they were not thinking that way. They were not having these categories precisely that then by defining, these different types of sexual desires and practices would shape them. So they didn't have really the category of homosexuality. It was more the difference of the different categories were more about who is penetrating and who is penetrated. That was the main difference in ancient Greece. Now, it doesn't matter if the person that this Greek Athenian is penetrated a woman or a man, it doesn't matter. That doesn't make him homosexual or sexually ambivalent. Or all these concepts are concepts and categories that we use today, but we cannot, without being, culturally and historically biased, use them by judging other periods of time. I'm going to take another example of the berdache. The berdache is a type of person in the Navarro civilization who was a male, or born with male, genitals, okay, but who happened to have a taste for female occupations, female activities. So, namely, threading baskets or stuff like this. And that would automatically make this person, in our words, a female, so to say. So, he would marry with a man, and and it's just so here again you see the categorization are not so much. It's not anymore about penetration, being passive or active in the act, but it's more about what occupations you prefer, what activities that's gonna define then your gender. So you see how historically, I'm not a historian of sex I'm not a philosopher of sex, and I'm not a historian of sex either. But it's just interesting to see how throughout history all these categories have shifted and changed, and these categories might very well have a huge power on how we define what's, permissible, what ought to be forbidden, what's, sexy, what's not sexy, what is supposed to trigger our sexual desire, what is not supposed to trigger our sexual desire. So those categories, historically, are very important. And on that note, I just want to do a little parenthesis here on language and the ability that language has to build these categories. And how it actually has an impact on how we perceive reality. So as I said, every society manages sexuality and sexual desires in a specific way, with conventions, taboos, censorship that are every time different, okay? By creating normative discourses about it. So that's something that Foucault, for instance, would say. But what I'm trying to say is that any discourse is by essence normative. Whenever you try to describe something, you're not just neutrally describing something and say, here are the categories and that's it, and it's just, neutral, objective description. No. The words and the categories you're building are always carrying with them a whole interpretation of the reality you're living in. And that's what language does. That's what something that Bergson insisted upon very, very beautifully. He said that words are stamps posted on things, and they just fix things. Just, here you are, that's it, this is a category, it doesn't move. And we just read reality through these, stamps that we see, glued on things, but we don't see what's behind these little stickers, basically. So here I'm not saying that it's possible to go beyond and find what the objective truth is. Whenever you begin to use language, you're always going to carry all this normative, by normative I mean morally charged, symbolically charged discourse with you. Okay? So, and for instance, I'm just going to give you a little example. When I'm asking you what is the male sexual organ? Go ahead. Penis. What is a female sexual organ? Clitoris. Here we go. Ah, okay. So usually people say vagina. So here you go. You see, just by using these words, by having this first idea that pops up in your mind, you already shape you already are saying something about the nature of sexual practices in general, or what they ought to be at least. Namely, we focus on penetration right away. Penis, vagina. You know, it's so this, like, that's what I'm speaking about, like the norms of the discourse, how it actually shapes away also the way we might think about sex in general. Okay, so on the historical perspective, just to go back on that very, you know, briefly, I just want to point out a little comparison between two different, you know, periods of time in history, namely the French Renaissance, let's say, on the one hand, that I happen to know a little bit about, and the Egyptian practices that I didn't know anything about, but that I learned and was very interested into. So, for instance, during the Renaissance, you would have like this list, this scale of sexual crimes that is pretty interesting, from like the more permissible to like the most horrendous. Okay, so first you would have onanism. Onanism, masturbation, basically, okay? So sometimes it would be punished by death, so it's not really like the minimal, you know, penalty, but whatever. It's considered as a sin and definitely a punishable offense. And it has been seen also by doctors, so you see, not even like politicians or the church, but by scientists as something that would definitely affect your health. Masturbation kills, said a doctor in France until the 19th century, so just to have a little idea. Whereas on the other side, if you look at the Egyptians centuries before that, you got, well, for instance, the invention of the first vibrator by the Egyptians, made out of papyrus with bees inside. Thank God better it doesn't open, right? But, so, you know, masturbation, why not? You had Cleopatra, who was apparently a big pro of fellatio. She gave blowjob to all of her guards to train on them and didn't lose any, you know, honorific status for that matter. So you had like this type of thing. You have also the invention of the IUD, which was a piece of wood, a piece of a tree, a specific tree that you would put up the uterus in the Egyptian. I swear to God, you can check it out. I was amazed. Okay, I don't know if that was very safe, but that proves that they were considering sexuality as just, you know, something else than just the reproductive, you know, ways of just like the will of making children, basically. Okay. So to go back on the beautiful Renaissance, debauchery was also punished, adultery, obviously, polygamy, obviously, death penalty for polygamy as well, incest between sister and brother. Well, it's funny because I'm teaching a class right now where I have to speak about Freud, and I always have difficulties to speak about Freud. I don't know, I'm a little bit allergic to Freud, I don't know why. Maybe one of the reasons is this idea that incest is just like a general taboo, universal taboo, something that every single society in every single civilization has forbidden. No. Cleopatra, again, I mean, I like this girl very much. Cleopatra married 2 of her brothers. Here you go. And how many times in, you know, aristocracy, even up to like the 17th century, you married your cousins, you know, your first, I mean, it happened. So I don't know about like this universality of incest as being just, you know, the taboo par excellence. You know, I'm not so sure about that. So zoophilia was also condemned, and, you know, today we have like a lot of debate about that. Homosexuality, obviously the worst of the worst, but you can find a lot of cases of homosexuality, even if the vocabulary, the terminology might not be adequate. You definitely had same-sex sexual practices for a very long time. So you see how it changes over time, but you know that. So anyway, society definitely imposes a surveillance on position, missionary, for instance, because never ever a woman can have like a dominant, you know, position at that time. Surveillance on what was seen as excesses in general. So the taboos and customs of each society contributes greatly to give an orientation or to shape our sexual desires. And conventions shape the sexual desire of the society members when they obey these conventions, as we said earlier, so that we feel like we have to obey in a way, we're normatized. But also, maybe it shapes our sexual desire when we disobey them. It's like it builds a whole counterculture somehow. And this is what I tried to insist on last time a little bit. And what I'm trying to say is just that indeed, it's in like the folds of these taboos that transgression can explode. If you don't have any taboos, you cannot transgress anything. And it so happens that when transgression explodes, very often eroticism explodes as well. So what I was trying to say, it's not that sexual freedom destroys desire. That's not what I said. I'm insisting on that. But it's just that sexual taboos might stimulate it in a way by creating the possibility for this counterculture, for this like against the norm type of culture that then is going to maybe make the paradigms of like new sexual practices shift to something else. And that's how historicity is possible, historicity of sex. If not, it would be always the same thing over and over for centuries. And it's not the case. So there is a margin of maneuver here. There is a certain freedom, maybe, that comes, you know, not only from our desire to break the rules, as I was mentioning, but also we can speak about our personal experiences. And I go back to what you were saying, you're right. Maybe the margin of freedom that we have can also come just from like, you know, personal memories. I give you an example that I found always a little funny in Descartes, who managed to be in love for a very long time with only women who had a slight strabism. And he asked himself, why? You know, why do I like only women that have like a, you know, that their eyes are converging? I don't know why. I mean, it's not supposed to be something particularly, you know, commonly accepted as beautiful, you know? And so he actually remembers at some point that's because his first love was so happened to be a girl that has that. He didn't love her for that reason, but he just loved her and she happened accidentally to have that. And then that little feature, he made him think about this first love, and he had the tendency or the inclination to fall in love more easily. So here also, just another example of how we can break the rules, so to say, not obligatory freely, because here you can say, well, then it's our memories, or it's our, you know, past, or personal memories who are influencing us. Yeah, but at least it's a way of breaking the collective rules or the social norms that I was speaking about earlier. So even in the most rigid cultures, we find an inner plurality, flexibility that allows for some improvisation, or some mutations within the models. Yes, we are most of the time actors, ignoring that we are such, by the way, and playing the roles imposed by a dominant group within society. Alors, it can be a different religion, political, or gender, the male dominance, obviously, for instance. But it seems that we can find some loopholes in which our desires emerge without just passively obeying the norms. So, to conclude, on the question, you know, what does stimulate our sexual desire? I mean, this question seems very broad, very vague, but very relative also, as we just said. And there is certainly no general or absolute object of sexual desire. There is a plurality. And I think this relativity and this plurality is worth teaching about, and not only at university or in occasions like this, but also at school. That's what I want to open a little bit about. I spoke with my roommates about that by asking them, like, oh, so what do you learn at school here in America? How is like, you know, what do you learn about sex? Nothing. So maybe you have like a few words about IUDs and like, you know, about STDs maybe, and about like the reproductive, you know, organs. We don't call them sexual organs, notice, we call them reproductive organs, namely like they are meant for reproduction, right? So we don't speak so much about the necessary respect, for instance, of the other partner at school. We don't speak about the legitimate interrogations on sexual orientation and its historicity, as I was just mentioning. We don't speak so much about the various natures of intimate relationships, nor about the difficulty of learning sexual intimacy, nor about the distinction between, I don't know, tenderness and sex, for instance, if there is even a clear one, about the complexities of modesty, of our body image within this sexual intimacy. So that's some topics I think that are definitely worth speaking about in school as well. And that might lead to another talk I might do one day. Here I wanted to be more conceptual and more descriptive, but if we approach, and that's also discussion you might have had a lot, there is a lot of discussion about porn. And if there is something to say, not against porn, but against the uses of porn, is that I have nothing against porn. But you need to watch porn with educated eyes. You need to realize what you're watching, the specificity of sexual practice that you're watching. And if you don't give these tools to the kids, and the only access and the only source of information they have about sex is, porn via internet, they're gonna look no matter what, and it's fine maybe. But then give them the mental, intellectual tools to just analyze what they're watching and the specificity that they're watching. Thank you. Any questions? Yes, I don't know. 1, 2, 3. Can you scream? Cool.
Do you think exposure helps define desire?
Exposure?
Exposure, like exposure to different ideas. And are we now, since because of social media, we can see so many different things, does that help enhance desire or limit it or something else?
Do you mean, for instance, the fact that certain people who might before have been isolated because of the peculiarity of their sexual desire, the fact that there is internet might make them feel like they can share with other persons that have the same type of desires, for instance?
Yeah, that one part, but then let's say I didn't even realize until they shared it that I liked that.
Ah. Yeah, absolutely. That would be also an interesting loophole to say, well, maybe we're not, obeying the general norms, by, the general morality that's imposed on us that we inherit from, Catholicism or Christianity in general and such. But maybe we might be also influences by exactly other tendencies that now we have access to via internet and all that. And yeah, internet in that sense would be like sex and internet would be a great topic. Yes. Go ahead.
I was intrigued by crystallization, the crystallization you were talking about. And so my question is, okay, if we desire something that we project, right, what happens when that dissolves slowly in the course of the relationship? Is there a way to maintain the desire when the crystallization is gone? What do we do then?
Hey, I'm not a okay? I'm not a psychologist, okay? But on that, what do I do? No, I cannot help you on that one, dear. But I can. That just gives me a desire to read that text I told you about. Can I read it to you? I mean, maybe somebody can somebody read well in English? Here you go.
Oh, what? Sorry.
Can you? Do you mind? I mean, because I'm afraid I wouldn't do a fantastic job, if you know what I mean. Alors, the text is from Rousseau, so he's an 18th century philosopher and novelist. And this is from one of his novels called La Nouvelle Héloïse, The New Héloïse. We definitely can find it. You're not going anywhere. Here it is. 3 et 4. Voilà. It begins him here and it finishes here. Go ahead.
Trying my best. Woe to him who has nothing left to desire. He loses, as it were, all he possesses. One enjoys less what one obtains than what one hopes for, and one is happy only before happiness is achieved. Indeed, man, greedy and circumscribed, destined to crave everything and obtain little, has received from heaven a consoling strength that brings everything he desires closer, submits it to his imagination, makes it seem present and palpable, delivers it to him, so to speak, and in order to make this imaginary property more delightful to him, modifies it as his passion dictates. But this whole spell disappears in the face of the object itself. Nothing any longer embellishes his object in the eyes of its possessor. One does not fantasize what one beholds. Imagination no longer adorns anything one owns. The land of illusions is on this earth. the only one worth living in. And such is the void of things human that, with the exception of being who exists in it himself, the only beauty to be found is in things that are not.
Thank you very much. Great reading. I mean, this is super tough to read. Even in French, like Rousseau is like, this whole style. But I think it describes, very well what happens when precisely, crystallization just, melts, And when does it melt is because when we actually achieve what we desire, when desires stop, so to say, and we just fall back into boredom, for instance. That's what I described last time with Schopenhauer, who describes life this very way. It's either pain or boredom. Pain when you desire, boredom when you have what you desire. Okay, so great. So on that note, my dear, I cannot help you. And then it would be worth speaking about love, I think, which is a whole other subject altogether, even if, we spoke about sexual love. But obviously, there are so many things, more things at play when we love a person, even if that, desire, that falling in love has disappeared. So that would be for a whole other topic, I guess. And I'm no specialist by no any way, shape, or form. Yes? Yeah?
Okay. Is this on? Yeah, okay. So you talked about how we will project, essentially, I'm not going to say it in the same words that you did, but we project an idea of what someone is onto them, right? And that's what we desire, is some image of what we think they are. But what is the function of that? Like, why do we do that? Is that a biological thing? Like, okay, I need to reproduce with this person, so I'm pretending that they're better than they are or whatever, because my body is like, yeah, you'll make a healthy baby. Or is it totally, I don't know. Yeah, just
precisely,
why?
Yeah, precisely. I think it's both. I think you have like three aspects or three instances of what can, make us desire something, somebody else over somebody, somebody over somebody else. And one of these aspects can be physiological. For instance, we tend to desire people who look healthy. White teeth, for instance, not just because it's white and pleasant, it's because it's a sign of health. So we tend to be attracted physiologically to these people because we feel that they could be great janitors. So that's definitely one thing, and a lot of philosophers spoke about that, absolutely. It's actually Schopenhauer, again, who said that sexual desire is just a trick of nature for us to make babies. And so we just are looking for the potential janitor, or janitress in the room. And the one that looks healthier, or for the woman, the one that's large hips because she's going to carry babies more, etc. So you have all that. Therefore, also the taste for breast, because breast is a sign of maternity also, etc. But that changes also. Today, small breasts are in fashion. Hey, how about that? And so how do you explain that, physiologically and for reproductive, reasons? Well, you don't. Okay, so the other aspect is this whole, societal, as I said, cultural aspects that, weigh upon us. And then there is also the personal memories. So these three things, okay, the physiological, the collective, sociological, cultural, and the personal memories thing that are gonna make us desire someone over someone else, right? And you ask why.
Yeah, we're like, what does it do for us? Why do we do that?
God knows. What I'm not. Let me think. I don't think this question is even possible to answer. I think we are desiring we are desiring beings to begin with. And this is something that it's within our nature. We need to desire. We are constantly desiring. Now, the ways, we can just speak about the ways this, desire is gonna take, the way it's gonna shape itself, and why it's gonna go that direction over the other. Well, the determination I just mentioned can explain that, but it cannot tell you why on a metaphysical level, for instance. Then you can think about God's plan or whatever you want, but I think it's very, here I just stay down to earth and try to analyze, what are these three main things at play. Yes?
So we were talking about why we desire, why we have these formative ideas. I noticed you didn't talk about Lacan or l'objet petit a. Do you not think that his ideas about like the pleasure principle have an influence on why we have that impulse? Do you think that's invalid or incorrect philosophy to the subject?
Please develop about Lacan, you know way better than I do.
Okay. So this is like me remembering lit theory from a few years ago, but Lacan kind of took off of Freud's ideas. He said that when we are born or shortly after we're born, we realize that we're never going to be perfectly happy, and he referred to this perfect state of happiness, or what that was, as l'objet petit a, and that we spend the rest of our lives trying and failing to reobtain that, and that the different ways that we as individuals try to pursue l'objet petit a makes us unique. Like we each find different ways to do that, and we'll spend eternity until we die repeating that over and over again because we'll never find it.
But this object is undetermined, right? It's not something in particular. What can be particular is the ways we are, taking to get to it. But the object per se is not defined, is it? So that's what I was trying to say also here. There is no specific, absolute, unique object of desire. There are just ways historically determined that we have to, that we actually take to look at this object or to try to obtain it. Okay? But then, I mean, the whole psychoanalytical discussion is like, it's something else altogether, and that would require to speak about the subconscious and all this. And we could speak about that if you want. Well, I'm not a big fan, and I think you all heard about the id, and this like monster within us. And you want to speak about Freud? I can speak about Freud. I can't speak about Lacan, and a little bit like, but certainly not as well as you did. But this is not really like the angle I was trying to. But definitely, it could be a nice add-up to this. Yeah.
So in this discussion, I'm kind of struck by the idea of what shapes our ability to shape our own desire. And one thing that I was self-reflecting on is that I am trying to avoid previously adverse events in my life. That a lot of what's shaping what I want is avoiding these things that I don't want. And in the same idea that kind of came up later is that culture is saying all of these ideals that are profound, and then we make a subculture of it. And so I'm wondering about the extent to which philosophy has some sort of reconciliation of the idea that we're avoiding things versus we're trying to achieve something, or we're trying to attain something that's like magical and effervescent and lovely, that is like a beautiful existence, or if it's like the avoiding of the pain of it, and seeing that in somebody else, that like you could bring me some sort of comfort and it doesn't come with that pain. That kind of like, that seems desirable to me, that it would be without trauma, that it would be without problems in some sort of level. And I don't know if that extrapolates to other people's psyches, like I'm wondering if that's my experience or if that is like a philosophical conundrum.
So that's kind of like a negative definition of desire. By negative, I don't mean negative in bad. I mean negative like it's, I desire to not live that. I desire to not do that. I desire to not. So it would be a whole like negative conception. But to go back on what you said, well, a bunch of philosophers have said like the two forces basically that rule our lives is the desire for the avoidance of pain, which is this negative desire you mentioned, and the desire to look for pleasure. And we are just in between the two. And sometimes even pleasure could actually be defined as the absence of pain. And Epicurus is one of these philosophers, by the way. So that's why, again, Epicurus it's not party time, okay? He says like basically his ideal of happiness is what he called ataraxia. Ataraxia is the absence of trouble. So it's not like a great intense pleasure, an orgasm or an orgy or whatever, of food. No, not at all. It's like the absence of pain. And just that is the best happiness you can reach. I think it's a beautiful lesson. It's a very simple lesson, but something we tend to forget when this society is always pushing us towards the second type of desire, namely like looking for pleasure instead of valuing the absence of pain. Which is why every morning we should wake up and be like, I'm healthy, I'm not sick today. Yay! That's what Epicurus would do in a way. You know what I'm saying? So yes, they have been speaking about that, definitely. I recommend Epicurus tremendously. Great, teacher of life.
Oh, thank you. You mentioned that we build this inner hallucination and how you went through all of that. But what would you say about the hallucination evolves into a type, brown eyes. Can't meet anyone without brown eyes. But all of a sudden you meet someone with blue eyes and totally different body type, but the chemistry is so extraordinary. Is that an anomaly to this?
So you're right that it's not only cultural, determinations that are at play here, but also definitely there is the whole hormonal aspect, the whole physiological aspect that, again, I think a scientific person would be more, more willing to speak about, I guess. But definitely a huge component of sexual attraction is within the hormonal components and this chemistry you're speaking about that might totally challenge the preconceptions we might have about what usually is our type, so to say, or what usually we think is objectively beautiful or something. Yes, absolutely. So it doesn't contradict it. I would say it completes it in a way. Okay?
When you talk about the forbiddenness and the taboos and why it turns us on, the forbiddenness and the taboos, like why they would be such a turn on, and it actually does relate it to the unconscious. I mean, it's because we keep, since we were children, we keep policing ourselves and being told you cannot do this or cannot do that, and it comes out as behavior such as anxiety or OCD. But especially in sexual behavior such as BDSM, you feel like pleasure in like spitting or peeing or whatever on your partner, and you have this and being accepted by the other partner, and that's such a relief. So would you say that collectively, because we were talking about in my class, like why books such as 50 Shades would sell so good is, I think it's probably because collectively we are keep like policing ourselves, and then by having this book going public, and is because the unconscious, repressed unconscious being relieved, and there's such pleasure and in being accepted. So it's more about acceptance than, or what do you think? I'm just wondering.
It's different to be accepted by your partner and to have like a mutual consent within your sexual intercourse than to be accepted collectively. And as soon as it is accepted collectively, maybe it loses some kind of the spice, is what I'm saying. And just to develop a little bit further on what you say, it's very interesting to me to see how sometimes our phantasms, these little stories we build, these little scenarios we have in our mind, can contradict greatly our ethical values. Let's say, for instance, submission desire that a lot of women have. Even rape, a lot of women have rape phantasms very often, who have in horror even the thought of the possibility of being raped one day. So that would be also interesting to analyze what exactly we're trying to cope with here when we have these phantasms. Why are they here? Is it like out of to feel reassured about ourselves? Can be that also when you imagine yourself in this glorious position, I don't know, or maybe to cope with certain fears, definitely. So you have all that that is like a whole intimate garden in a way, and I'm not sure it's worth making it accepted on a collective level, on a social level. I say here what matters is really like between you and your partner. That definitely morally, is important, of course.
Well, first of all, thank you for this. Secondly, out of the three aspects of sexual desire that you mentioned, one being, biological, second being social, and third being kind of personal. Social is the one that is changing. You can kind of predict it, right? We can predict events in society, but the other two are more like ceteris paribus. You can't really change the other two. Those are personal or have such long developmental process that you can't really make a case that one thing is going to happen and it's going to change the entire society, right? But the social ones are they're conditional. So following that, do you think that we can predict, based on power structures and events in society, what will be the object of sexual desire in a certain period?
No, no, it's you give me way more, credit than I deserve. Well. First of all, so you say the social is like totally determined and that doesn't move. What I tried to say here is that precisely that's why there is a historicity. That's why it changes through time, right? Yeah. The other two can. That's what you said. Okay. I think also, let's speak like the personal memories thing, for instance. I mean, that would be a whole other philosophical subject, but our memories change. Our memories are not our past events. Our memories are the way we perceive now these past events. And this perception that we have on our past might very well change. Something that we don't want to remember, we have a very bad memory of it, might actually become a good memory with time. I speak specifically about like bad love stories, for instance. You just break up with someone, for now it's something you just don't want to remember, you associate it with pain, and with time you can just, memories, it's a fantastic tool. It just filters down, it reshapes in order for you to better live with your past, basically, okay? So there is the whole psychoanalytical aspect of that as well. But so I think that also can change. It's not that like set in stone. And the physiological, that's more difficult. But again, I think there is no such like clear dichotomy between cultural on the one hand and physiological on the other. It's like, as you say, because you say it becomes part of your DNA. Maybe after all, you were right to say that. I don't know who said that. Like it's really, I mean, our bodies even are informed by these norms that have been, waiting upon us for so long. So again, I think everything is more shifting and more changing than you might, suppose. But in which direction, I don't know. Well, I think I have to stop. I'm sorry, but thank you very much, guys. It was a pleasure. Thank you for your participation. Thanks a lot.